Okay, good Monday morning. That's a picture of where I lived in Dallas in 1980, the Park Lane townhomes, and I will get to that in just a second. Um, I want to talk about the issue of having my skin in the game and the whole idea of normativities, and as it relates to the work I'm doing right now, the possibility of the movie series or video series based on my, streaming series based on my books, the idea and also my own self promotion online, and some issues that have come up recently, particularly with age verification. That's going to, and it's a series of two or three videos. So let's get into it. First, let me just return to this and, um, I'll start by saying that back on October 1st, 1980, I remember seeing when I went into Metropolitan Community Church um, at Reagan and Brown on in Dallas, Texas. Um, I remember seeing a "Lost Everything" sign on the bulletin board, and there was a young man who had been kicked out of his home and everything, and was looking for a place to stay. And I had never housed anyone before, but we had recently had a, a request from people to house Cuban refugees from a Mariel boat lift, and that had been a big deal in Dallas in in the earlier part of 1980, and this was still about 2 or 3 years before AIDS would be in the news. That hadn't been discussed yet. That was a big controversial moral issue. So I wound up that day taking him in, bringing him back to um, my house on Park Lane, which is in North Dallas near I-35. It was away from Oak Lawn. And he stayed there for 3 months and left in January of 1981, which became a year in which a lot changed, as we know. Um, just earlier that year, it had been an interesting year personally. I had traveled on a triangle fare in the old Braniff Airlines, which would fail in 1982, from Hawaii to Alaska, and then flew over Mount St. Helens from an airplane, saw the volcano, the remnants of it, and before flying to San Francisco before flying home. And just to mention, and let's show another map, the Mariel boat left from Cuba into Florida, and then people spreading out, particularly in the South, had been a real issue back then. And I actually saw that. I saw that picture of the MCC when I was at the Cathedral of Hope, which kind of followed. It's actually now United Churches of Christ. It was built on Inwood um, in the late 1980s, and now it's a very large church that's still heavily to gay and lesbian members. And when I'm in Dallas, I usually go there on Sunday morning if I can. Um, so I just wanted to share that picture also. Um, but other things that happened that year. Um, One time in 1980, we were working for this combined A and B Medicare consortium, CABCO, which people who know me, anybody who remembers me then that finds this video will remember me. We were working in the Zale building on Stemmons Freeway. It was near Oak Lawn. We could look out over the parking lot and see the cars we had parked about 8 floors below. And one day, earlier in 1980, the consultant was a woman who came from California, asked me if I would change her tire for her. Her tire had gone flat. She said that men were supposed to be able to change tires for women, and I couldn't really do that. And then there was another time in there was another time in back in 1969 when I was stationed at Fort Eustis, um, and I was driving back from Arlington, my parents' home in Arlington, to Fort Eustis, which is about 10 miles east of Williamsburg. Again, near William and Mary, which is ironic in my case that my life returned there. Um, Tire blew out on I-64. I mean, tires don't blow out very often anymore. And it's only happened one other time in 2005. That was after damage in a storm. But and fortunate, and I couldn't really put the spare on, but fortunately, another service member stopped who recognized me and helped me put the tire on, and we drove on the spare to a gas station that was just off of I-64. And on a Sunday night, it was actually open, and they actually were able to replace the tire, which I was surprised you could do on a Sunday night for about $50 then, or it wasn't as expensive then as it is now. It was expensive for a service member. Um, but that was another experience with this kind of thing. Now, there might have been an opportunity for me to house asylum seekers in 2016, but this didn't quite happen for a variety of misconnections and so forth. But I almost had this kind of experience housing people again just before the Trump administration. It would have been more likely to happen if Hillary had won the election. Um, the I'd also mention a couple of other things. When I was the People's Party back in 1972, I remember this was before I came out the second time, a going to a drafting house in Newark on a cold night in December and listening to people from the People's Party want to cap everybody's income at $50,000 a year and want to completely eliminate inherited wealth, completely eliminate the ability of people to inherit money that they didn't actually work for. The people believe you should have to work for everything you had with your own hands. And that sounds like Maoism, communism, and it is. Um, then when I was substitute teaching, this is Swanson Middle School, and I actually went there in the 50s. Um, I would have trouble with when I did have assignments at middle schools. I would have trouble with um, less, intact kids with discipline problems. That partially contributed to my stopping subbing, although it was a kind of complicated thing. But one time there was an occasion when I had a special education assignment, and I was actually supposed to accompany them on a field trip and get in the deep end of the swimming pool. And I never really learned to swim very well. And I'm supposed to monitor the locker room. Well, given my history and the things I've talked about online, I wasn't really comfortable with doing that. So you can see where this is headed. Um, and so that's my boyhood home, the backyard, my boyhood home. We'll get back to that in a minute. Those are my sites, my books again. I'll just mention that. But let's just get on to where this is happening. And also in the issue that CNN's been doing a series about how it really happened. They did the program about the Titanic. Remember the movie in 1997 when the people were evacuating? It was women and children only. In other words, men were supposed to protect women and children. Again, you see where I'm heading with this. So this is kind of the main topic of this little series, is my own accountability for social justice concerns as an individual. I don't belong to any group of oppressor versus oppressed, and I'm not loyal to any one group's social justice goals. I don't function as part of a group. I just function. So I have to have my own agency. And so I have to have concerns about my own personal social credibility. And the left, particularly since Trump and particularly and Charlottesville, and particularly during the pandemic, it shifted concerns with critical social justice theory away from about privilege away from the individual's own record to simply what group you belong to. And, exercises where if you're white, you're supposed to be particularly apologetic. And you've been hearing about a lot of this recently, some of the more extreme things. Now, I thought that one of my biggest concerns is that for years, for 25 years, I had the blogs for 16 years and I shut them down in early 2022. But I've been speaking critically about all the issues which were derived from gays in the military in those books. Um, back from, again, back from excuse me. I've been speaking critically back since the late 90s. Not really concerned, not really held accountable for what happens when people find my work online. And in the earlier days, it wasn't about algorithms or social media. It was just simply about search engines. And they were very effective. And people often found the text of my books online and my other essays. And I had built up a lot of movie reviews, particularly in book reviews, but particularly movie reviews. And I would say, edgy things. They weren't pornographic or anything, but I would say things like talk about the physical attractiveness of characters in some movies. And I remember one time there was a search engine argument, teenage boys with hairy legs. I remember that somebody searched for that because I talked about one of the Harry Potter movies and the appearance of the actor and so forth. And that kind of thing, when people find it, when young people find it or minors find it, it still might have an effect on how they think about gender. And in a sense, I wasn't held accountable for it. So that's maybe an issue that, given all recently about about minors in school, the curriculum for minors in schools. Well, I mean, really, there was some of this issue before because you could see anything, and that, of course, led to the litigation about the Child Online Protection Act which was overturned in 2007. We're going to talk about that more in another video. One of the things is with the trust, though, because I don't really ask people to register or give me anything, because I do have an inherited trust, so I don't ask for donations. And people can buy my books, and some people do. That's the only way I really get income is people buy the books. They can buy the Kindles, but that I don't really charge people for anything online, which is unusual. Most people have to set up Substacks or have to have sponsors for their channels online. My YouTube channel isn't big enough to have sponsors, although it's getting bigger. The number of subscribers has been growing a lot recently. But I don't promise beneficiaries that I'll participate in their activism, which in itself, whether that's okay when you're managing a trust, it's been particular an issue with HRC recently, because I'm very concerned about the overplaying of the gender identity issue with minors in schools and where that's led, and where that's led for women's spaces also. So I don't march and protest myself. I may film them for my videos, but I don't march in them myself, or I don't try to raise money for anything. I do the critical thinking myself and seek to publish my thoughts, but I don't actually directly seek to benefit others. So I don't really have any direct accountability for my speech from minors, even though it's certainly much less than most influencers in social media now. So, having people depend on you, which was the first part of this video, sort of gives you skin in the game. And for me, that has something to do with other things like being prepared for disasters, being prepared for prepperism, being prepared for adversity and external problems, which the left generally is not willing to talk about. Um, we could consider the idea of personal credit scores and put them on a blockchain like cryptocurrency, but then would that make us into China? We seem to be might be migrating toward being more like China, it seems to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, if something happens, it's on me. If we have losses due to war or expropriation. It's really on me. I would still own it. So that gets down to the last topic, and um, what's the best way to have dependence? To have people actually depend on you, as I talked about in the first with the taking in that person in Dallas, was to have your own children in a heterosexual marriage. And there are other possibilities, adoption in a gay marriage, which wasn't really possible for me in most of my life. Um, Having younger siblings certainly is a valuable experience for most people. I was an only child. Um, so I wound up with more filial responsibility for taking care of my mother in the 7 years from 2000 after her heart attack. And there were issues in 1999 that I'd moved to Minneapolis. And then when I came back in 2003, she finally started deteriorating around 2008. And we wound up with caregivers and everything. But that was a big deal for me because I had no siblings. Um, but over time, without the legal protections that most people had from formal discrimination or formal equality like HRC wants, I did have some advantages over other. I didn't need to spend as much money in housing, so I had less debt. So I had more cash and I had more free time. So there were advantages to not having a family. And having a family started becoming perceived as an afterthought. So it's important to develop and deploy individual skills. Some of these may seem gendered in order to provide for others, but it's also important at some point to bond and empathize with others while actually developing your own private skills. I just want to go back here to the pictures for a second. And that's the boyhood. That's the backyard and the boyhood home. It became a baseball stadium. You would see the old Arlington Hospital back in the 50s. It's now the Virginia Hospital Center. That's my mother dressing me, and that's in my room. That's a little bookcase. That I became a pianist. Um, became, and I could have gone down that route had the world been a little different. But I became quite skilled at piano, and then started composing music. And then here's a couple of pictures from the Kennedy Center, just to round up the interest in music. Um, so that's kind of what I want to talk about in this first episode. I'm going to talk about some more things, particularly about age verification controversy soon, in a couple of follow-up videos. There's some other very serious issues. So that's the issue for this morning, and there'll be another one soon. And I do thank you for listening.